Imagine a decade that felt like one long, nonstop party. Brand new cars flooding the streets, jazz clubs packed every night, and a stock market that, well, it seems like it could only ever go up. That was the 1920s. The Great War was finally over, and America was ready to roar. But, what happens when the party finally stops? And that feeling, that incredible optimism, was captured perfectly by President Herbert Hoover right here. This was his inauguration day, March 1929. The country's future felt absolutely golden, unstoppable, bright with hope. That pretty much sums up the promise of the entire decade. But just 8 months later, that bright future went completely dark. All that hope, it just vanished. The entire economic system came crashing down. The party was officially over. So that leads us to the big question we're going to tackle here. How did it all fall apart so fast and so spectacularly? Okay, so to understand the crash, you really have to understand the boom that came before it. The 1920s weren't just roaring, they were completely revolutionary. Technology and this brand new consumer culture were changing everything about what it meant to be an American. You see, for the first time ever, the country had a truly national culture. And a whole lot of it was being created in the dark of a movie theater. Get this, 90 million tickets were sold every single week. Americans from California to Maine were watching the same stars, like the legendary Charlie Chaplin, and they were dreaming the same modern dreams. It was this huge, unifying experience. And if there's one thing that really changed the landscape, it was the automobile. Henry Ford's assembly line worked miracles. The price of a Model T plummeted, and by 1929, there were 23 million cars on the road. Now, this wasn't just a new way to get from A to B. It literally built new industries: oil, rubber, steel. And it created the very idea of the modern suburb. It gave people a sense of freedom they had never, ever known before. And that new freedom was part of a bigger revolution, one that was happening right inside the home. Radios were bringing the same news and music into living rooms coast to coast. But how could people afford all this new stuff? Well, two very clever innovations: easy credit and modern advertising. For the first time, you could buy now and pay later. And this booming ad industry wasn't just selling you a vacuum cleaner, it was selling you a new vision of the good life, one that was always just one easy purchase away. But here's the thing. Beneath all that shiny, glittering prosperity, the foundation of this new America was actually full of cracks. The decade wasn't just one big party. It was a culture war, a real battle for the nation's soul. In a lot of ways, there were really two Americas living side by side in the 1920s. In the cities, you had this new morality taking hold. Think flappers, jazz clubs, and illegal speakeasies. But out in rural America, there was a huge backlash, a powerful defense of traditional religious values that saw the city as just sinful. And this whole conflict famously blew up in the Scopes Monkey Trial, a massive courtroom showdown over teaching evolution in schools. All this cultural anxiety, it also fueled this deep, deep fear of outsiders. Nativism was surging, which led to the incredibly controversial trial of two Italian immigrants, Sacco and Vanzetti. The government even passed strict new laws to slam the brakes on immigration. And most chillingly, the Ku Klux Klan was reborn. It swelled to millions of members and expanded its hate to target not just African Americans, but Catholics, Jews, and any recent immigrant. Now, while all these social cracks were getting wider, the economic foundation was getting just as shaky. The real engine of the stock market boom was this thing called buying on margin. And essentially, it was just gambling with borrowed money. You could buy a stock with just 10% down. If the price went up, hey, you made a fortune. But if it went down, you were completely wiped out. And the entire market was being built on this incredibly risky bet. So it all added up to a system that looked amazing on the surface, but underneath, it was a total house of cards. Factories were making way more stuff than people could actually buy. Almost all the wealth was held by a tiny fraction of people at the top, and the whole thing was fueled by that wild, debt-driven speculation in the stock market. It was really only a matter of time before someone bumped the table. And in October 1929, the table wasn't just bumped, it was flipped over completely. The moment of reckoning, it had finally arrived. The collapse didn't happen in just one day. No, it built over a week of pure rising panic. First, you had Black Thursday, when the market took this huge nosedive. But then, a group of powerful bankers stepped in and managed to stop the slide, which gave everyone a false sense of hope. But the fear was real. On Monday, it plunged again. another 13%. And then came Tuesday, October 29th, the day the panic became absolute. On that one day, Black Tuesday, investors panicked and traded over 16 million shares. The ticker tape machines printing out the stock prices literally couldn't keep up. And when the dust finally settled, $14 billion of wealth had just evaporated. To put that in perspective, that was more than the entire US government budget for the whole year. It just vanished into thin air. The sheer scale of the drop was just breathtaking. I mean, look at this. In the span of just 2 months, the stock market lost more than half its value. People's life savings were wiped out. Fortunes that were built on margin debt were gone in an instant. The financial engine of the country had completely seized up. So why didn't the market just bounce back? Because the crash was only the trigger. The system's foundations were rotten to the core. Over 90% of banks had been gambling in the market. When they failed, they took the savings of ordinary folks down with them. The whole global debt system just shattered. And then this virus of fear took over, and everyone stopped spending. The crash wasn't just a market correction. It was a total system failure that pulled everybody down. So the Great Crash very quickly became the Great Depression, and its real cost wasn't measured in stock points, but in human suffering. A new, bleak American landscape started to emerge. Shantytowns, built out of scrap metal and cardboard, popped up on the edges of cities. People bitterly nicknamed them Hoovervilles, a direct shot at the president. Men who once had good, steady jobs were now standing in bread lines for hours, just waiting for a piece of bread and a bowl of soup. And the pain was not shared equally, not at all. By 1932, the unemployment rate for African Americans hit nearly 50%. In this desperate scramble for the few jobs left, they were almost always the first to be fired and the last to be hired, facing horrible discrimination on top of the economic collapse. And as if the economic disaster wasn't bad enough, an environmental one was brewing out on the Great Plains. Years of over-farming and a massive drought combined to create the Dust Bowl. The topsoil, the very earth itself, literally started to blow away in these terrifying black blizzards that choked out crops, killed livestock, and buried entire farms. This quote from an Oklahoma farmer, it just captures the heartbreak perfectly. All their work, their entire lives, turned to dust and then blown away by the wind. It was a crisis that felt almost biblical in scale, a complete betrayal by both the economy and the earth itself. So, where was President Hoover in all this? Well, he was basically a man trapped by his own philosophy. He deeply believed in rugged individualism and was completely against direct government aid to the people. He asked businesses to voluntarily keep people employed and created a program to loan money to banks, hoping the benefits would eventually trickle down. But it was way too little, way too late. The final nail in his political coffin came in 1932. A group of desperate World War I veterans, known as the Bonus Army, marched on Washington. They were just asking for an early payment of a service bonus they had been promised. Hoover's response? He sent in the army under General Douglas MacArthur to drive them out with tear gas and bayonets. The image of the U.S. military attacking its own veterans was just shocking. It cemented Hoover's image as a man totally disconnected from the suffering of his people. By 1932, the country was on its knees. That incredible optimism of the Roaring Twenties felt like a distant, bitter memory. It was a harsh lesson in just how quickly a house of cards can fall. The nation was desperate for change, desperate for a new leader with new ideas, and that leader would promise a new deal for the American people. But the question that hung in the air was enormous. Could a nation this broken ever truly be fixed?